Welcome back to the Delineation. My name is Cam White. If you are new to my channel and this podcast, this is the podcast that I just talk about whatever the hell I want, whenever the hell I feel like it. And today we are talking about the history of Mars retrograde. Now, why am I doing this? Typically before a big transit, I usually like to do some research about it before I make a video about it. So typically with like a Mars retrograde or a Venus retrograde, I make a video about it that goes into like how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. Well, I decided to kind of look a little bit more into this Mars retrograde, and I found quite a bit of things. So this is a little bit of the history of Mars retrograding, specifically through Cancer. And so I didn't plan on making this video, but there was a lot of things that I found that I just thought were really interesting to talk about, especially just getting to know the zodiac sign Cancer better. And I think that's important because right now, if you're on the membership channel, if you're on the Learn tier, we are going into a deep dive into the zodiac and all of its meaning. Comprehensive course. So if you want to learn everything about the zodiac, go ahead and join the membership on the Learn tier. But so just my brain is already kind of focused on just like the zodiac and symbology. And so I was just kind of going through this and I just saw a lot of things that were really interesting. So in this video, we're going to be covering some of the things that I found really interesting with Mars retrogrades in the past. Now, the thing to understand about a Mars retrograde is they are not always on time. Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years, and every 15 or so years, Mars goes retrograde in a very similar spot in the sky. I say similar because Mars retrogrades are a little bit all over the place. Like, for example, when Venus goes retrograde, every 8 years, Venus goes retrograde in the exact same zodiac sign, but minus 2 degrees. Mars isn't like that. It goes retrograde in the same zodiac sign, but with a lot of varying differences. And so doing research on this exact Mars retrograde is a little bit difficult, but I was just looking into some of the past times Mars went retrograde into both Leo and Cancer, or just Cancer in general, and I figured we're going to talk about Mars retrograde in Cancer because the majority of this Mars retrograde is in Cancer. And there's kind of a lot to talk about. So first off, let's talk a little bit about the dates of all of this. So I'm going to go over this really quickly because I can get kind of lost on it. Mars enters shadow just after the eclipse on October 2nd, I think it's October 5th, my bad. Mars enters shadow on October 5th at 17 degrees Cancer. It will have a few interesting transits. And the first transit it gets is on November 3rd. Mars is going to go opposite Pluto. Okay, Mars in Cancer opposite Pluto in Capricorn. Then by December, December 7th, Mars goes retrograde into Leo. It will then go retrograde opposite Pluto in Aquarius. Then it will go back into, where is it at? Mars will go back into Cancer. For a little while, it'll station direct, and then it'll go back into Leo around April next year and go opposite Pluto again. Now, why is that significant? The first thing is, well, let's go back to the last time Mars retrograded in this area of the sky, which was 2007. The very end of 2007 was when Mars retrograded here last time. And what's interesting is Mars went retrograde in Cancer, and before it went retrograde in Cancer and it was in shadow, where is it? There it is. Mars was opposite Pluto in Sagittarius. And so Mars went opposite Pluto in Sagittarius at the end of 2007, went into Cancer, stationed retrograde. Where is it at? There we go. Stationed retrograde, went backwards, went back into Gemini, went opposite Pluto in Sagittarius again, stationed direct, and then when Mars entered Cancer again, it went opposite Pluto in Capricorn. That was at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. What happened during that time? That was the Great Recession. That was the 2008-2007 financial crisis. Why is that interesting? What's interesting about that is we got Pluto moving into Capricorn with a Mars retrograde going opposite it. So we got Pluto leaving Sagittarius and going into Capricorn with a Mars retrograde going opposite it. And now we have Pluto leaving Capricorn and entering Aquarius permanently, or I should say for like the next 20-ish years, with a Mars retrograde opposite it. That's really interesting to me. So that was kind of like one of the first things that I just kind of picked up was like, oh, we have Pluto moving into Aquarius with a Mars retrograde opposite it. And when Pluto moved into Capricorn, we had a Mars retrograde opposite it. So that was one of the first things. Now, Mars goes retrograde in the same exact zodiac sign approximately every 15 years. We're going to be going over 2000, a little bit of 2007 and 2008. We're going to be going over 1977 and 1978. There was a lot going on there. We're going to be going over 1960 to 1961. We're going to be going over 1945 to 1946. And we're going to go a little bit into 1916. This episode is tailor and handcraft made for the ADHD people out there, because I'm not going to go linearly. I'm just going all over the place and showing you guys some of the research I have. So with that being said, why don't we just start into it? So again, this is the history. We're going to go a little bit everywhere. Because astrology research is so difficult. For example, there are a lot of things that happen at any given time. With astrology research, what you're doing is you're looking for common themes that you would like, that are kind of rare, that you see each time a transit happens. And you try to look for things specific to that transit. And I did find one theme that I thought was really, really important for Mars, specifically in Cancer. But I also found other stuff that I thought was interesting. And first off, we're going to start off with the 2008 Jerusalem yeshiva attack. Okay. I am recording this on September 18th of 2024. I originally started to record this 2 days ago, but I got interrupted and I couldn't finish it. And 2 days ago, I was going to bring this up. And what happened in between now and then? Israel blew up a bunch of Hezbollah pagers and now handheld radios. So this was really interesting. A lot of people have asked me to talk about the Israel-Gaza war with astrology. A big reason I haven't talked about it is, if you know anything, it's been happening since Israel was first founded in like the 1940s. Like, it's October 7th was not the beginning of this war or conflict. And so when people are like, is it going to end or that, it's like, this is such a long drawn out thing that, like, again, a lot of people think that October 7th was the beginning of all this, and they're insanely misinformed. Israel and Hamas and Palestinians, it's just been terrorist shit for like the past like 50, 60 years. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know what to say. This wasn't a new thing. This has been happening for a long time. But I did find it interesting that through quite a few of these Mars retrograde cycles, there were some like attacks between, Jerusalem and Palestine. Now, the other part of that, though, is what's hard about astrology research is understanding the context of the time. For example, there's a bunch of shit related to, Israel and Palestine in the 1940s. But that was when like Israel was being founded. And then like same thing in the 1960s, the Yom Kippur War, the 7-Day War, or the 6-Day War, whatever it was. So like, it's hard to weed those out in terms of like, okay, what would make more sense for that transit in particular versus like, that was just what was going on at the time. You know what I mean? Anyway, this was something I thought was really interesting. And on March 6, 2008, a lone Palestinian gunman shot multiple students at the Merkaz. Hebrew is such a funny language. The Merkaz Harav Yeshiva, a religious school in West Jerusalem. 8 students in the assailant were killed. 11 more were wounded. This was on March of 2008. This was right when Mars went back into Cancer, went opposite Pluto. So we have a Mars-Pluto thing there. And the reason I think this is also important right now is it's September 18th. We're almost at the year mark of the October 7th attack. With that being said, we're seeing Israel currently, they fucking put explosives in Hezbollah's pagers, which is, if you are not brainwashed by all of the Israel propaganda, you can, and you're just, even if you're just into history and war, you can understand how fucking insane that is, that they literally hijacked a manufacturing supply side and put that in. That's genuinely in fucking sane. And this isn't like Palestine. That was Hezbollah. That was Lebanon, a actual sovereign nation, not really involved. And then when you get into Hezbollah and Lebanon and their relationship, it gets a little bit complicated, but it is genuinely crazy. And I think what that is going to be is just, they're trying to fuck with them because, again, Israel just wants to get into war because whatever fucking reason. And again, America, we're going to pay for it. We're all going to get drafted, whether that's going to be to Russia or Eastern Europe, or whether that's Iran and Israel, or whether that's China, Taiwan. We're all getting drafted. Either way, I thought this was interesting. Okay. So we're going to be coming back to this theme. But the next thing, my Oh, I have such a precious little group of following that are my conspiracy theorists, my tinfoil hat people. I love them. I'm about to bring up their favorite person right now. Are you ready? Who do you think, before I click on it, who do you think the tinfoil hat people, who I'm saying that out of love because I'm one of these people, who is their favorite person ever? Not Trump. Bill Gates. Bill Gates is their favorite person. They love this guy. Why is Bill Gates why is he now involved? So in 1977, which was one of the last Mars retrogrades in this area, let's go ahead and pull up the chart. Like I said, the ADHD people are going to love this episode because I'm going to go everywhere. This is just a lot of stuff that I found interesting. And if you know anything else about this time, please let me know in the comments. This is a open discussion video. This is not I know, I'm telling you exactly everything and I'm the one source of truth. Not at all. If you know something more about a situation, please inform me in the comments below. I want a discussion. But if we look at around this 1977 time, Mars went retrograde in Leo and it went back into Cancer. Now, why is that significant? Well, in 1977 and 1978, around this time, was when Bill Gates was arrested for the first time. What was he arrested for? He was arrested for drunk driving. Now, that's not a big deal. But let's take a look at Bill Gates' chart. And one of my predictions for this Mars retrograde is something bad is happening to Bill Gates between really October to next May. Like Bill Gates, something's going on with Bill Gates. If we look at his chart, he has his ascendant at 26 degrees Cancer. So Mars is going to retrograde over his ascendant. It's going to retrograde into his second house of money and go back over here. He was arrested one of the last times that this happened. So he was arrested for drunk driving in 1977. That's not that big of a deal. But why else do I think something is going to happen to Bill Gates? Well, if we do annual perfections, if you are not familiar with annual perfections, pretty much it's the most accurate technique in astrology. It's genuinely terrifying how accurate it is. What it does is it tells us what exactly is going to be significant for a person. What we do is we take the ascendant and we move it one sign over for every year you're alive. Bill Gates, this year, his birthday is October 28th. In 2024, he's going to turn, hold on, let me do the math. 2024 minus 1950, 2024 minus 1955. I can't remember. He's 69. So 60 years old, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69. So he's going to be in a 10th house year, which is about career, public notoriety, your reputation. Big deal. Second thing is Mars rules his 10th house of career. And he has Mars in detriment in Libra. Okay, not the best year, but that also means Mars is activated for the year. That means it's going to be his Time Lord for the year. So that means whatever Mars is doing in the sky is going to be affecting him the most. And that is Mars going to go retrograde in his second house of money, and it's going to square his sun, and then it's going to go over his ascendant. That all starts on October 28th, which is his birthday. Then, by the time Mars leaves shadow in April and May of next year, Saturn is going to conjoin his midheaven and his moon. There's going to be a Venus retrograde over his midheaven. There's going to be a Mercury retrograde over his midheaven. Saturn's going to go over his midheaven. Something big's happening to Bill Gates. I don't know what it's going to look like, but one of my predictions is pay attention to Bill Gates. He's got something huge going on for him over the next little while. His birth chart is not directly related to the Mars retrograde in Cancer, but the fact that he got arrested during one of the last ones for like a little DUI, not that big of a deal. I just think something big is going to happen to him. However, there is another person who my sweet twin tinfoil hat babies who have been obsessing over lately. And this one's really fun. Candace Owens. If you don't like Candace Owens, that's fine. But she's had quite a very interesting expose of this person. Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron is the president of France. And the rumor is his wife, who, by the way, groomed him when he was like 14 years old, because she was his teacher and she was like 30 something, maybe even 40s, because there's like, I think, a 25-year age gap between them. Groomed him in high school. It's like the only woman he's been with. There's a rumor going around that she is not a woman and that she is trans. I don't know. She claims that she has a brother, but no one's ever seen her and her brother in the same room, and this brother's also missing. It's one of those things that is kind of interesting to me. But Emmanuel Macron was born, as you could see here, during that Mars retrograde in 1977 into 78. Why is that interesting? Whoops, that's not what I want to do. Because if we look at Emmanuel Macron's ascendant, he is a 28-degree Capricorn rising, which means his descendant, his relationships, is 28 degrees Cancer rising. Now, want to know something interesting about Emmanuel Macron? He got married. I'm going to double check this real quick. When did Emmanuel Macron get married? I think, let me double check this. Oh yeah, October of 2007. So Emmanuel Macron got married to this woman in October of 2007, which was the last time Mars retrograded in this area, in his 7th house of relationships. But now Mars is actually going to go over his ascendant. Now, I don't know what his Time Lord is, so let's actually look that up. 2024 minus 1977. He turns 47 this year, so he's going to go into a 12th house year. Jupiter's activated. Okay, Jupiter will go into his 7th house. Something's going on with him and his wife. That to me was like, I don't give a shit about most things going on in Europe. If you've never looked at the European Union birth chart, okay, by the way, the ADHD people are going to love this episode because look at this. European Union birth chart. Okay. I have a theory that a lot of people think astrologers are in the upper echelons of oh, you know what? Actually, I think I have it on mine. People like to think that astrologers are in the upper echelons of like, you know, billionaires and politicians. And my theory is they're not. I don't think that's happening at all. Like, I think maybe you'll see something happen every now and then. But something that vindicates this is I want you guys to, have you ever seen the EU's birth chart? It's one of those things where either A, check this out. This is the European Union's birth chart. Either A, astrologers are not working for the European Union and the people that set this up. Or B, astrologers are working for the European Union to set this up and give them the right time and day. And the people who wanted this, it was like the Illuminati went to astrologers like, pick us the worst possible day to ever found a country or a nation or a conglomeration of states. This is the worst chart I have ever fucking seen. And the fact that this is the EU's chart is just like, oh, I mean, it's Mars, Pluto, it's Mars square Saturn in a night chart. It's like almost an eclipse. The moon is on Algol. This is such a terrible chart for a nation. This is so bad. This is so incredibly bad. And this just, in my opinion, is like, no, I don't think astrologers helped the EU they didn't help them out at all. So why did I bring up that? It's mostly because I don't typically give a shit about things that are going on in the European Union. Sorry, America. We only care when we have to go save your asses from fucking Germany, which now we're gonna have to save your guys' ass from Russia, by the way. Anyway, I just thought this was really interesting because his whole wife got brought up just recently in the allegations of her being trans and all this other stuff. And the fact that he's going to have this Mars retrograde in his 7th house. Emmanuel Macron and his wife, look out for that this winter. Okay, next big thing being brought up. Oh, this is the wrong one. Okay, next thing. The Island of Stability speech. If you guys watch Valuetainment and you know Patrick Bet-David, he is a big-time podcaster guy. Long story short, he made a really interesting connection because he's from Iran. And he fled Iran during the Islamic Revolution. He brought up a really good point that it was after President Carter visited Iran that everything went to shit. And so this was in December of 1977. This was when Mars was retrograde in Cancer, that President Carter visited Iran. And if you guys don't know before, Iran used to be a very powerful ally of America. And the Shah of Iran, I mean, we literally pulled a coup and installed the Shah of Iran in 1953 And yeah, that was like one of the CIA's first big jobs. They're like, yeah, we can do this coup thing. Anyway, and it was literally after this meeting that Carter went and visited the Shah of Iran that the Iranian Revolution kicked off. So we have some more stuff to talk about with that. So the reason I just bring this up is Iran has a lot of stuff coming up in the future. Number one, Israel wants to kill them. Iran's just a weird country in general. God, I wish Iran, same thing with Afghanistan. I wish it wasn't ran by the Taliban. Afghanistan looks so beautiful. Iran is such a beautiful country. I wish I can go visit it in a way that things weren't so tense. But we have a Saturn-Neptune conjunction coming up here in the next couple months. Well, really in the next year. Saturn-Neptune conjunctions are important for Iran. And so I find this interesting that we're having this Mars retrograde in Cancer, which the last time this happened was like literally right before the Iranian Revolution. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. I don't have much to talk about. I just thought that was really interesting. What's the next thing that we have brought up here? What else was going on in 1977 and 1978? Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy were at the height of their murdering spree during this Mars retrograde. That was in 1977 and 1978. That was the Mars retrograde in Cancer, from Leo into Cancer, which is, again, what we're having is a Mars retrograde from Leo to Cancer. And like I said before, in 2007 and 2008, Mars was only retrograde in Cancer and Gemini. In 2009 to 2010, Mars was retrograde only in Leo. In 1992 and 1993, I believe it was only Mars was retrograding in Cancer. I don't think it was actually in Leo. So trying to find the exact cycle is a little bit difficult, but 1977 and 1978 is the closest in time that we have that's very similar, and it is the most similar Mars retrograde that I have seen so far that's noteworthy. Now, the other thing is this is the late 70s. Serial killers were just doing their thing back then. They could just be like, I didn't kill anybody, officer. And the cop's like, I knew you wouldn't be killing anybody. I'll see you. You know, your basement kind of smells like rotting corpses, but I'll leave you alone. And then, like, you know, if you know anything about John Wayne Gacy, it's like a cop is at their house. He's talking to him, and then like a little boy pulls up. And the cop's like, it's weird, but I'll just ignore it. Anyway, I'm not sitting here and saying that there's going to be more serial killers, but I thought that was really interesting when it came to serial killers. What I found more so interesting was if we look at that time period, that was actually Mars retrograding in Leo with Saturn in Leo. Let's do. So during this time, Saturn was in Leo and Mars was retrograding in Leo. And again, Saturn was also there. So you have both malefics in Leo here. That's not like oh my gosh, like that serial killer energy, but just the fact that you have both malefics there, and these are like really high profile, like murders and stuff like that. That just to me was a little bit more interesting than not. So I just wanted to bring it up because, again, this whole video is about, let me just show you what I found. There's only one specific thing that I keep seeing time and time again. And I have, as you can see, we're going to go through all these tabs in order. I'll let you know when we're coming to it. All right, so John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, all of those murders were happening during this Mars retrograde in Cancer. If you have an idea of what that means, please let me know. But let's go to the next one. What's the next one? Oh, yeah, and John Wayne Gacy. So the investigation into the disappearance of deplaned teenager Robert Priest led to Gacy's arrest on December 21st, 1978. I just watched a documentary about John Wayne Gacy. What a guy. What a guy. Next thing. So here's a really big deal. This is where we start talking about what is a Mars retrograde in Cancer all about. Child pornography laws in the United States. This is the Wikipedia. Child pornography. Oh, I gotta censor that. CP. Watch, I'm gonna get censored on YouTube now. Gosh. You can't say anything. I'm just reading what the text is. For my FBI agent, Special Agent Kyle, I'm just reading the news here. So CP first became illegal at the federal level in 1978 with the enactment of the Protection of Children Against Sexual Exploitation Act of 1977. Before the 1978 law, CP was illegal only in 2 states. Now, why is that interesting? Think about what Mars retrograde represents, or Mars in Cancer. Cancer literally represents babies. Cancer is about children. And we have Mars, which is about fights and conflicts and about protection. And so this to me was like, whoa, Mars retrograde in Cancer, and there's the first legislation of protecting children. That's interesting to me. And also notice that this was with Jupiter and Gemini, and Mars in Cancer. So that is the other thing that we're seeing, a very similar, Mars will be retrograde in Cancer while Jupiter's in Gemini. That's interesting to me. So we have the first legislation around CP and Mars being retrograde in Cancer. That is like a hit. That is a direct hit of like, okay, we're making laws and legislation to protect young people. And we're going to see more of that as time goes on. But here's the kicker. Here's where it gets really crazy. And at first I read that and I was like, oh, that's so Mars retrograde in Cancer. Can you guess who was also born with Mars retrograde in Cancer at the same time that this law was being enacted? I talked about it on my Instagram story. Ashton Kutcher. Why does that matter? Ashton Kutcher, do we have the Wikipedia page? No, we don't. Ashton Kutcher works very deeply with the FBI in capturing pedophiles and protecting victims of CP from online abuse. Like, that is what he does. He's an actor, but he does that full time. That's why, like, when Danny Masterson, the actor from the 1970 show, was getting arrested and Ashton Kutcher defended him, that was why that was such a big deal, because Ashton Kutcher works directly with protecting minors in this area. And he has Mars retrograde in Cancer, which is so crazy, because if we also look at his chart, this is another thing. His fifth house ruler of children is on his midheaven. Like, when you have your fifth ruler on your midheaven, it's like you work with children, you work with art, you do stuff like that. And he works with children, and it's in Aquarius, the sign of, like, again, like the internet. And he like protects kids from online like abuse and trafficking online. But he was born, so he does this, right? And he was born when the first federal law around protecting children from that happened. That's crazy. Like, that's the idea. That's the whole idea of astrology. Like, you encapsulate the moment of time in which you're born in. Like, that's the whole point of your birth chart. And we see a direct connection with that. First federal law against CP gets enacted. Boom, Ashton Kutcher's born. And that's like his life mission. That's wild, guys. So Ashton Kutcher, pay attention to him in the news. He's got something coming up. I could not help but see that. And again, Mars is retrograde at 25 degrees Cancer. Mars will be retrograde at 25 degrees Cancer. We got to look out for Ashton Kutcher. Something's going on with Ashton Kutcher, okay? So next thing, we get to the 1978 Tabriz protest. Tabriz, that sounds like the Middle Eastern knockoff of Febreze. 1978 Tabriz protest refers to the events that occurred on February 18th, 1978. 40 days after the 1978 Qom protests, several clerics in the Qom and other major cities across Iran had announced the 40th day commemoration for those killed during the Qom incidents. Long story short, this is kind of what led up to the Iranian Revolution. So we see Carter visit Iran. We get these 1978 Tabriz protests, which really, this was kind of the beginning of the Iranian Revolution. And so I've talked about how in my Saturn and Neptune video, so if you are new to my channel, go to my delineation playlist, and I have a video about the history of Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. And one of the big things I talk about is how we installed the Shah in a coup in Iran in 1953. The fact that we're going to another Saturn-Neptune conjunction makes me curious about what's happening in Iran, especially because there's a lot of buildup and a lot of just the military-industrial complex. Man, they want Iran. They want it so bad. And again, Israel is like, oh, you want Iran? We'll make that happen. We'll just start fucking bombing everybody. So I find that there's going to be a little bit more craziness in Iran. Wanted to bring that up. Next thing. Whoops. Oh, no. There we go. Oh, whoops. I totally skipped this. History of dolphin fishing and utilization in Japan. So check this out. Where was this? It was somewhere around here. So when I was looking this up, this was just Super Mars retrograde in a water sign. What I found was that there was this Japanese dolphin massacre that occurred during this Mars retrograde, and the Wikipedia page doesn't exactly give you the dates that I found, but on Iki Island, Nagasaki Prefecture, a large-scale pursuit fishery was conducted from 1976 to 1986 for the purpose of vermin control. According to fishermen in Iki Island, since 1965, schools of dolphin have appeared in the surrounding waters and intercepted yellowtails caught on the hooks of pole and line fisheries, and the small whales have caused the loss of fish stocks. And it was around this 1977, 1978 Mars retrograde in Cancer time where they just pretty much got a bunch of dolphins from the water, dragged them to the beach, and beat them with clubs. I mean, they still kind of do that too, but this is like when it started, which is so Mars retrograde in Cancer, and you are beating up aquatic life like dolphins. That is so funny. That's just so... this is why astrology research is hard, because you're just like looking for stuff and then they're like, oh, the Japanese just like beat the shit out of dolphins during this time. Okay, that's interesting. We're not going to see too many more things like that, but I wanted to bring that up for the sake of this episode. Something else that I don't actually have, oh no, my computer does this thing where when I left click, it doesn't actually, you see how I'm left clicking and then it's like trying to right click. All right, hold on. I got to pause to figure this out. Okay. For whatever reason that fixed. Yeah. Sometimes my computer does that and it's, horrible. It really messes with me. Okay. So one of the other things I found was, there was multiple conjoined twin surgeries happening during this time, but look what happened here. The discovery of hepatitis C happened in 1977, 1978. So let's actually go down to history. In the mid 1970s. So the article that I originally read on this, again, I'm just pulling up the Wikipedia for the sake of ease, but the article I originally read was around 1977 to 1978. This is what it said. In the mid 1970s, Harvey J. Alter, chief of infectious disease section in the Department of Transfusion Medicine at the National Institute of Health, and his research team demonstrated how post-transfusion hepatitis cases were not due to hepatitis A or B viruses. Despite this discovery, international research efforts to identify the virus, initially called non-A, non-B hepatitis, failed for the next decade. It was during this Mars retrograde where they discovered this. Think about that for a second. Mars rules blood. And you have like a Mars retrograde in Cancer, and there's like bad blood. Like that's such a, just kind of a literal manifestation of a Mars retrograde, of like just bad blood during that time, which is like something the medieval people would say. So it wasn't formally discovered during this time, but it was discovered that there was another hepatitis going on, which again, just bad blood. And again, also affecting the liver, which is a whole other issue, but bad blood, during blood transfusions. That's just so interesting to me. I don't have a opinion on like, oh, there's going to be another discovery of that. It's just more of like, that's, again, all I'm showing here is just things that I thought were interesting in the history of the Mars retrograde cycles. And we're going to come back to it. The only other thing during this 1977, 1978 time was James Franco was born with Mars retrograde in Leo, but I didn't see much else to talk about with James Franco. Okay, so then let's go to our next one. So we get to 1945 and 1946. In 1945 to 1946, we also had a Mars retrograde in Cancer, and that was a very important time. One of the first things to talk about with this timeline was this is when the Nuremberg trials were happening. How much of that is related to Mars retrograde in Cancer, I don't know. That was before a Mars-Saturn conjunction. But I thought the Nuremberg trials were interesting. But more importantly, the United Nations were found during this Mars. So Mars was actually, I believe, in shadow, if I'm not mistaken. Let's go to October 24th, 1945. So October, Mars was in Cancer. Yeah, it was before a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Like the Mars-Saturn conjunction was literally like when the Nuremberg trials happened. So then Mars goes retrograde in early Leo, just like it's going to, and then conjoins Saturn. And so the Nuremberg trials were happening during this time, and the United Nations were founded. Now, what does the United Nations have to do with anything? Well, as we get into global war, which is what's happening, like as much as it's getting really frustrating how many Americans are like, we want Ukraine to win, when all that means is like Russia is just going to attack Ukraine even more. Ukraine's going to do something that escalates that. And then NATO's going to get involved, which means people like me get drafted to go die for Ukraine? Anyway, that's going to happen. And as we get into more global war, things like the United Nations are going to get involved more. For example, I've talked a lot about the civil war that's possibly happening here in America. If there is some sort of a civil war, or there's some insurgency groups or militia groups, and there's a disconnect between the US military and its populace, you will see the United Nations get involved in a country like ours, or even NATO troops getting involved in a country like ours. And so I find in the multipolar world that we're going into with the BRICS nations and with the UN, I find this Mars retrograde interesting to me, that the United Nations has this in their birth chart, was they were literally born when Mars was in shadow in this area, which I also found really interesting for the United Nations. The idea is like we get all along and we can kind of protect each other, and that's a very Mars and Cancer sort of a thing. And the United Nations does technically have a military, but it's kind of a not military, if that makes sense. Like they're only for defending, versus like NATO. I mean, ask Bill Clinton if NATO can actually, start a war, or at least, drop bombs unprovoked like they did in, Bosnia and Serbia in the 90s. But I found that really interesting that the UN was founded during this time. So something else. Let's go back to, Nuremberg trials happened November 20th, 1945, right before Mars went retrograde. In fact, that actually might have been, November 20th? Let's take a look at that real fast. November 20th. Yeah, like literally just like a couple days, or maybe a couple weeks before Mars went retrograde. About 2 weeks before Mars went retrograde, the Nuremberg trial started. Don't know what to think about. Again, thinking of it in context, it's 1945, 1946. We're getting over post-war stuff anyway. And the Nuremberg trials were kind of big until they weren't in 2020. And they were like, yeah, you can experiment on everybody. Don't worry about it. Informed consent. What's that? So the next thing, Night of the Trains. I know I keep zooming in and out everywhere, but look at this. The Night of the Trains was a sabotage operation of the British railways in Palestine on November 1st, 1945. The operation was one of the first carried out by the Jewish resistance movement before its official establishment, and symbolized its founding. Okay, we're getting a little controversial because everyone agrees on Israel and Palestine, right? It's so funny talking about this too, because I just know in the comments, it's just one thing after another. You can't even just like talk about it. But again, I was trying to record this 2 days ago before Israel blew up all those fucking pagers and radios, which is still just insane. That is genuinely crazy for the democracy in the Middle East to do. Really crazy. Like if we did that to ISIS, we would have to answer to somebody. But anyway. So the fact that there was a Jewish bombing of a Palestinian railway is really interesting to me. Just in terms of that war escalating even more. The fact that we have a little bit of history with this war. And again, when we start talking about the 60s, we will see that up. But right now we're talking about the 40s. So we talked about 2007 and 2008 for just a second. Then we talked about the 1977, 1978. Now we're talking about 1945 to 1946. Then we're going to jump back to the 1960s. We're all over the place here. But this was really interesting to me. So the next thing is Chinese Civil War. If you don't know anything about the Chinese Civil War, it's fine. It's really complicated. Long story short, China was in a civil war. And then in like 1938, I believe it was 1938, Japan attacked China. And whatever you do, don't Google what Japan did to China and Korea. Like, were the Nazis and Hitler bad? Yes. But boy, does Japan and their war crimes not get talked about enough, because holy shit, there is a reason there's a lot of tension in that area. So pretty much Japan went over and committed war crimes for like a decade. Absolutely destroyed China. And then the second we nuked their ass and we got Japan out of there, Civil War was back on. So China went from Civil War to being conquered by Japan, and then just straight back to the Civil War. And the Civil War kicked off again during this Mars retrograde in Cancer. And there was a few things around, like Stalin, seizing Imperial Japan's weapons and giving it to the CCP party. the biggest thing that I see from this is we still live in a environment in which this civil war matters, because it was this civil war that the communists won against the nationalists, and the nationalists were sent out to Taiwan. And then Taiwan was like, well, we're here. And then you had the fucking genius of TSMC be like, we should make semiconductors and make the world protect us. And their plan fucking worked really well. And now we're at this period of Taiwan and China. Again, I don't think that's going to be the next big war. I think that happens a little bit later in the 2020s, more so maybe 2030s. Even if it does happen, there's the whole China-Taiwan thing, I think is a little bit blown out of proportion. To be honest, like it's going to be really bad when it does happen, but I think war with Russia is a way bigger deal. So why that's important is, again, I don't look at this as like, oh, that war is going to kick off again. But the fact that we are in this state of time in which China and Taiwan tensions are higher, and this Mars retrograde, one of the last times, picked up that war again, is just interesting to me. And again, if you know more about the China Civil War with the nationalists and how that ended up, and if something happened in 1960 to 1961, or if something happened in 1977 to 1978, or again, the 92 to 93, or 2007, 2008, let me know, because I only know so much, but that was really interesting to me. Okay, so the theme I keep finding with this Mars retrograde is protections around children. Let's go to this next one. In 1945 and in 1946, on December 28th, 1945, so again, Mars retrograde in Leo going back into Cancer, the War Brides Act happened. This legislation, enacted on December 28th, 1945, aimed to expedite the admission to the United States of alien spouses and alien minor children of citizen members of the United States Armed Forces. The War Brides Act. Think about that. Like at Cancer, I made a joke. I forgot where I made this joke. It's on my membership, one of my membership videos somewhere, but I just, oh no, on my lecture. I did a whole lecture about the precession of the equinoxes and the age of like Aquarius and the age of Pisces. Well, during the age of Cancer was when humans started drinking milk from domesticated animals. And I made a joke about like, you know, Cancer's the big mommy milkers zodiac sign. And I just find Mars retrograding in Cancer, and you have like a War Bride Act. Like there's nothing more trad wife than like Cancer. Like Cancer's like the trad wife zodiac sign, in my opinion. So that was kind of interesting to me. And we have a few more things that happened during Mars retrograde that again talk about protecting children, and even things like wives and stuff like that. So this is really interesting to me that I'm seeing that commonality. Okay, ladies, I don't know how I feel about this next one. I don't know if this is good or bad. We're all going to pray together right now that it's not bad. But you know who was born during the Mars retrograde in 1945 and in 1946? Yes, it is our queen, Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton was born with Mars retrograde in Cancer. And if you look at her chart, she has Pluto going over her sun right now. And this Mars retrograde is going to be going opposite her sun and her Mars. Mars does rule her 8th house of death, and Saturn is going to go in there. This bitch is like 100 years old, but she still looks. I'm 2024 minus 1946. So she's 78, about to turn 79. So 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79. So she's about to jump into an 8th house year with her Mars return happening. I hope nothing bad happens to Dolly Parton. But I found that really interesting, especially that Saturn's entering her 8th house, Pluto's going over her sun. But Dolly Parton was born during this time. I don't know enough about Dolly Parton's history, because I would be actually really, because look at this Mars-Saturn conjunction she has in her 11th house. Like, does she have like a story about being like super betrayed by friends, or not having friends, or being outcasted? Because that is a rough transit to have. That is both malefics in detriment, retrograde in a night chart in the 11th house. Does she have friends? Is Dolly Parton okay? But something's going on with Dolly Parton. I thought that was really interesting. And that was just like a flyby chance that I found that. All right, next topic, 1945, 1946. So the article I first read about this, the date was during the Mars retrograde, but the Wikipedia article doesn't have it, and if I'm not mistaken, it was in January of 1946 that we decided Bikini Atoll, which is the area in which this TV show SpongeBob is based off of, Bikini Bottom. If you're not familiar with Bikini Atoll, this is where we set off all of our nukes. We did so much nuclear testing in this area. The people of that area have not forgotten because we fucked them over. Of course we did. But what I found interesting about this was like Mars was conjoining, like again, Mars and Saturn and Cancer. And like we found a literal like watery area to drop nuclear bombs on. So like literally Mars, Saturn conjunction in Cancer, and we're just dropping bombs in the middle of the ocean. That to me was a really interesting connection that I couldn't help but notice. So again, testing nuclear bombs, Mars, Saturn stuff, war stuff, in a water sign. So again, like I said, the biggest thing I keep finding as similarities with the zodiac sign Cancer and the Mars retrogrades is protections around children. And there's a few more, but the rest is just kind of more interesting stuff that I found. And what else happened during this time? The Cold War started. So there's kind of a little bit of controversy around when the Cold War started, and that it actually started with the Truman Doctrine, which was kind of like, we need to do this. But I read some other stuff that talked about, I forgot what exactly it was that triggered it, but that the Cold War essentially started around this time, which I also like for just Mars, Saturn, retrograde, and Cancer. Like, again, Cold War, watery war. Cold War started around this time. Yeah, the first phase of the Cold War began shortly after the after the end of World War II, 1945. And it really wasn't until 1947, where is it? Yeah. It was the Truman Doctrine. I think it was in the Truman Doctrine of 1947 was when it quote unquote technically began. But I read some things that it was like really 1945 to 1946 was the time. And the Truman Doctrine just kind of cemented that starting. Why is that important? Because again, the war with Russia that we're going to be going into is frankly bullshit. Russia just, it's one of those things where, again, if I don't scream and cry on the ground that Trump is Hitler, people think that I'm the most pro-Trump person, or that if I don't scream and cry that we should send another $100 trillion gazillion to Ukraine, I must be a Putin puppet. The history of Russia, this is not the Cold War. This is not communist Russia. Putin is a different ball game. And again, you really don't even see Western media antagonizing Putin until after he intervened in Syria when we wanted to take over Syria, because the whole point of the Middle East world is to take that over, put them on the dollar, take over their oil, and then again use entrapment to get into Russia, get into China. Because the whole idea is a global world order, like America being the imperialist nation to take over everything. And essentially with Syria, Russia kind of said no to America's imperialism, and we got really angry. And then we attacked Putin to be this horrible person, and he's not the best person. He's definitely not the worst world leader in the fucking world, which is always crazy to hear him compared to like people like even Hitler or Stalin. He's not nearly as bad. That doesn't mean he's good, but why I found this Cold War starting around this time interesting was we're kind of in a Cold War. Like what the Russia-Ukraine war is a fucking proxy war where, again, if Ukraine was not funded by Americans, they would sign a peace treaty to whatever Russia wants. The only reason Ukraine's in the war is because we supply them with weapons, and we are freely killing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men for the sake of Western influence. That's all it is. And so between next spring of 25 and winter of 2026, you will see the escalation between NATO and Russia hit a boiling point to where there will probably be war between Russia and NATO. And that is really serious. I don't say that lightly. And people keep thinking that, oh, Ukraine's going to win one day. And no, they're not. This boils into war with NATO. That's what I'm predicting. And I find it really interesting that the whole Cold War started with a Mars retrograde in Cancer. And it's like, okay, is this Mars retrograde in Cancer, I just read today there was a huge explosion off the in Ukraine near the border of Belarus and Russia. We're starting to even talk about sending long-range missiles to where they can attack Moscow. And yes, Putin is like, well, that's a red line. That's a red line. That's what every country says. But, you know, at some point it is going to get crazier. And, you know, the war is not as simple as, you know, people keep thinking Putin is going to come after Eastern Europe. He's never fucking said that. He's never said, oh, I'm going to take over Poland next. And I'm going to, again, 1 minute, this is such an annoying war to hear Americans talk about because they're so retarded on this subject. Find me one fucking article where Putin says he's going to take over the rest of Europe. And again, Americans will be like, oh my God, Putin is he's going to take over Europe and it's going to be really bad. And he's going to go after Poland next because he wants to build the USSR. And in the same breath, they will say, Putin is so dumb and the military is so weak, they can't even take over Ukraine. Which one is it? Which one is it? Is it Putin takes over the world or Putin can't even handle a war in Ukraine? It is so retarded. It is so retarded and is so obnoxious. I'm so sick of hearing regular Americans take on this fucking war. And again, even the pro-Ukraine people, like when NATO gets involved and there's a draft, you better not resist that draft because fuck you, a bunch of Ukrainian men died because you supported our government funding the shit out of them. You better go join them since you want to fucking be in this war so much. So anyway, now that I have that off my chest, I found it interesting that the Cold War happened during this time. I just found it interesting, okay? All right, let's go to the next subject. This was also the Cold War. Yeah, why do I have two articles about this? Anyway, who's this fucker? This is Tim Cook. Tim Apple, as we all love and know him. He had, if we get to 19... Oh, wait, hold on a second. This is 1971. This is not the same Tim Cook. No, I've looked at Tim Cook's birth chart. That's not Tim Cook's birth chart. Oh, see, okay, whoops. I was like, I've seen Tim Cook before. Who is this Tim Cook? What does that say? At the Eden Mills writer... Canadian military history. I don't give a shit about him. Tim Cook birth chart. I was like, this is the wrong Tim Cook. Tim Cook Apple. Here we go. Whoops. You guys can't even see. Astro Theme has to provide it. So I feel like as an astrologer using Astro Theme is like when you have to hit up the sketchy drug dealer to get your drugs and you kind of don't trust him. Astro Theme will put wrong birth times all the time, but Tim Cook has Mars retrograde, Mars in Cancer, and he was born during that retrograde cycle. I know Tim Cook is supposed to be retiring from Apple at some point. I don't know when, but I think it's supposed to be soon. Part of me wonders if it's going to be around this time when he does actually retire. So just keep out on the lookout for Tim Cook or Tim Apple, as they say. I wonder what's going to be happening with him. Next topic. New York City subway bombings. In October and November of 1960, New York City experienced 5 bombings that injured more than 50 people and killed a young girl. So now, again, we're looking at 1960 to 1961. During that winter, we had a Mars retrograde in Cancer. In October and November of 1960, New York City experienced 5 bombings that injured more than 50 people and killing a young girl. Walter Long, 29, a Manhattan mental institution escapee, was identified as a prime suspect. So we see this like bombing escapade during this time. I don't know what to think of that, to be honest with you guys. I was just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Again, if you know anything more about, for example, were there bombings at the subways in the late 70s, in the early 90s, at the late 2000s? I would be really curious about that. And I just don't like. Again, there's like terrorist events happen all the time, and I look at these transits and it's hard to be like, okay, is this like a Mars retrograde in Cancer transit, or is just like a normal day in America where you get bombed in a fucking subway? So that was interesting to me. That's really the only thing. Jean-Michel Basquiat was born with Mars retrograde. I only have recently figured out who the hell Basquiat is, But I found it interesting that he has Mars retrograde in Cancer. So if I have any artist people that know more about Basquiat and how maybe the Mars retrograde in Cancer might have shown up in his life, I would love to know. I can't think of anything off of the top of my head, but that was really interesting. I'm pretty sure he's dead. But anyway, the next thing. So, protection around children. Why does Mars in Cancer keep bringing up little kiddos? Look at this. So I read an article about this, and the Wikipedia page and what you could find is really difficult. But essentially, January 1st of 1961, Australia became the second nation to permit birth control sale. Whoa. Think about that for a second. Mars retrograde in Cancer, I'm going to take a pill, and I believe this was hormonal birth control. I'm going to take a pill that stops me from having babies. That's pretty Mars retrograde in Cancer. And at the end of this video, we're saving the best for last. We have a really big one to talk about. And it was the full moon in Cancer. Whoa, I didn't see that. My dad was born on January 2nd, so I know this, but full moon in Cancer on Mars retrograde, the halfway point of the Mars retrograde, and birth control. So Australia became the second nation to do that. I couldn't figure out what the first nation was. I don't know if that was America or what, but birth control, Mars retrograde in Cancer, pretty interesting. And we got more birth control stuff coming up. So the other thing about this Mars retrograde in Cancer was Dwight D. Eisenhower. By the way, apparently Dwight Eisenhower's granddaughter is an astrologer. I just found her on Instagram. What's this fucking girl's name? I forgot how I found her, but yeah, apparently his granddaughter, let me see, I followed her. She didn't follow me back. Laura Magdalene Eisenhower. And she looks like Dwight Eisenhower. It's really fucking wild. Like, she literally looks like woman Dwight D. Eisenhower. So Dwight D. Eisenhower's granddaughter, or maybe it's his great-granddaughter, I think it's just his granddaughter, was born, not born during this time, but she's an astrologer. That blew my mind. But his farewell speech was really important about talking about the military-industrial complex. And he also talked about like the technocracy and how tech could be used to intervene in elections and stuff like that. That's just the interesting thing to me. I don't know what to associate with Mars and Cancer with that. Now, let's do a little bit backwards stuff. Okay? This is the grand finale of this. October 16th, 1916, Margaret Sanger opened the country's first birth control clinic in Brownsville, Brooklyn. If you are living under a rock and you don't know what's going on right now, this whole election is between pretty much not birth control, abortion and everything else. So let's fly back to 1916. Okay. We're looking at October 16th. So why is this important? This is when Margaret Sanger, who started Planned Parenthood, she's kind of like a really big figure in this area, started Planned Parenthood, opened up the first birth control clinic. Why is that important? Number one, as you can see here, Mars was not in Scorpio. But what was going on in Cancer? We have a Saturn South Node Pluto conjunction in the sign of Cancer. This was right when Pluto entered Cancer. And again, there was like a little while when Margaret Sanger like left the United States to the UK and then came back. This is still an area that I'm thinking of. October 16th, 1916. Yeah, right? Yeah. Hold on. I'm missing something. Maybe it was the year before. Yeah, the year before was when Mars in 1915 into 1916 Mars went retrograde in Leo. That's right. And it was around this time, I think, that she was coming back and forth. And then October is when she founded the first birth control clinic. When you talk about Pluto and Cancer, now, if you're not familiar with Margaret Sanger, she was kind of a eugenicist, and the whole point of Planned Parenthood was to kill black people. So they didn't, birth any more people. And it's really interesting how Planned Parenthood kills more, black babies than anything else. But, and I know like Planned Parenthood's kind of been like, we don't associate with Margaret Sanger. There's nuances to that and stuff like that. But you're talking about a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Cancer. Pluto and Cancer, you're talking about the transformation of like women and their bodies. like, and again, you're talking about Cancer, like Cancer's like fertility. It's ruled by the moon, and Pluto is there where there's like a literal transformation, but like a death rebirth in this area. And you have like Saturn. Again, the reason I brought this up is it's amazing to me how Cancer is so relative to children. And like, again, the first CP law, Mars retrograde in Cancer, birth control, Mars retrograde in Cancer, Planned Parenthood, Pluto, Saturn in Cancer. There's another thing too to bring up here. And again, if you know more about this, I'm a guy. I would, whoever, I know I've got at least one flaming liberal in my comments that knows way more about Planned Parenthood than me. I would be more curious about the time and Margaret Sanger's, because again, around this time, there was a Mars retrograde in Leo in 1915 into 1916. And then in 1913, there was a Mars retrograde in Cancer. And I didn't talk about much about in this video. I didn't talk much about the Mars retrograde in Cancer in 1913. The only two things was there was the LA aqueduct that was created and the Federal Reserve Act. The problem with the Federal Reserve Act, though, is like if you get into like the 1940s, there was a lot of strikes and banking regulations. That was during the what is that called? Bretton Woods Agreement. That was more of a Uranus and Gemini thing. There was just a lot of stuff that was happening during that time that wasn't really associated with the Mars retrograde in Cancer. Same thing, the Federal Reserve Act started with the Mars retrograde in Cancer in 1913, but that's just, I don't think that was Mars in Cancer, if that makes sense. I don't think that was a Mars Cancer thing. I think it just happened to line up during that time. Let's go here. We have only a few more. Okay. So the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act. So this was actually implemented in 2006, but from what I understood when I was reading about this around the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, which is when we had that Mars retrograde in Cancer, was when it started to really kind of get enacted. The Walsh Act organized sex offenders into 3 tiers according to their crime committed. And there was something around. Oh yeah, the act also organized all state and territory sex offender registries into one searchable national database, which again essentially became Megan's List or Megan's Law, whatever it is. So that happened around this time, even though again the law says it happened in July 27th, 2006. From what I understood, that was during the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. That's when a lot of this stuff was like kind of coming online. Now, here's this one. This one blew my mind. Child Soldiers Prevention Act. Like, come on, guys. Child soldiers, Mars retrograde in Cancer. Now, this was also happening more towards the end of 2008. But again, during this time, around the from the end of 2007, beginning of 2008 was when a lot of this stuff was coming online and being talked about. And it didn't get signed until 2008. But the Child Soldiers Prevention Act, it pretty much is a United States federal statute signed into law by George W. Bush as part of the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008. What's this, actually? 2000, okay. The law criminalized leading a military force which recruits child soldiers. That to me was really interesting for, again, this part doesn't really line up with the Mars retrograde in Cancer, but it's close to where I'm like, come on, Child Soldiers Prevention Act. We already got War Brides Act. And then this is the EU chart. Okay, that's pretty much it. I know this episode was really all over the place. The big thing, my big thing about the history here is Bill Gates, Ashton Kutcher, Emmanuel Macron. They're coming up in the news. I feel 100% confident about that between now and spring of next year. Bill Gates is between now and spring of next year, but over this winter, I think Ashton Kutcher and Emmanuel Macron will come up in a big way. But I thought the bombings between Palestine and Israel were a bigger deal. And again, stuff revolving around birth control, stuff revolving around protection of children of some sort. You know, for some people that might be that could, again, like, let's say Kamala Harris wins. It could be day one, you know, abortion is legal, you know, across the world, across the country. That could be, you know, a bill blocking child transgender surgeries. I couldn't tell you which way it's going to go, but I do think that this Mars retrograde in Cancer is going to bring up protecting children in some sort of way. And again, when we look at the Cancer stuff, that does bring up, you know, things like abortion and birth control. However, that can also involve, again, protecting children. So it depends on which way, but that's one of the main things I was looking at. So again, this was just a free ball episode. I just wanted to show you some of the things I thought were interesting during this time, and let me know what your guys' thoughts are below. And here soon, I will be making the video of how the Mars retrograde in Leo and Cancer is going to be affecting you. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to see that, and I'll be seeing you guys soon.